So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Welcome to our results webinar for this year's Home Waste Audit. We're really excited to see what those 2 weeks were like for all of you. And so, you've taken time for a deep dive into your waste bins. And tonight, we're going to take a deep dive now into all of that data that you collected. We're also going to share some of the survey results and ask you a few more questions about your experience. So, we'll definitely have some interaction during this webinar. And then before we begin, we just want to recognize the history of the lands we call home. We are thrilled to have people joining us from all over and extend our acknowledgements to the Indigenous and traditional past across all territories. For our organization, we speak to the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We're so grateful to have this opportunity to work on this land as we all become more responsible stewards. And to introduce, again, I'm Susan, and I am our program lead for volunteer and community programming. I'm also joined by Chelsea. Just wanted to share in terms of my fun fact is I really enjoy jigsaw puzzles and especially the ability to swap those with friends when I'm done. I'll turn it over to Chelsea to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you again. I'm Chelsea. I'll be sharing some of the results tonight. I'm looking forward to it. My fun fact is that every year with the trash team, we pull hundreds, I think about 600 kilograms of plastic from Lake Ontario, but every summer I still swim in it. And I hope to continue to do so. So hopefully we can keep cleaning up our lake.
Awesome. So as a reminder for this evening, the objectives of the Home Waste Audit were to learn about your local waste streams and also work to find ways to decrease your waste footprint as we all work to divert waste from our landfills. So in tonight's webinar, what we're going to cover, if you go to the next slide, we're going to explore your data to show a little bit more about any of the reported differences you had in waste management. We'll look at our different waste behaviors and knowledge. And last but not least, we'll have a look at your self-reported waste habits over the last 2 weeks. And then just want to give you a little bit of a reminder for Q&A. The chat is open the whole time, so if you have any questions as we're going, we'll try to answer them as we're able. Otherwise, we'll save them until the very end. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A, and we'll give you those instructions when it's time. I'm going to turn it over now to Chelsea, and she's going to share us a little bit about overall waste management results and a bit of a review back into plastic pollution.
Thanks, Susan. So first off, just to give a little bit of a reminder of what we talked about before we sent everyone off on their way last time, is the issue about plastic pollution. So we know that a lot of plastic pollution ends up in rivers, in lakes, and oceans every single year, and that this number is predicted to increase if we continue business as usual, meaning if we don't change our habits, if we don't enforce new policies, if we don't reduce production, etc. We know that plastic is a really persistent pollutant. So once it ends up in the environment, it tends to be there for quite a long time, degrading slowly and accumulating as microplastic. We also know that this plastic, both the big stuff and the small stuff that degrades from the big stuff, threatens wildlife. It can cause entanglement, it can smother ecosystems, and of course, it can also be eaten by organisms, causing either physical effects or chemical effects from all of the chemicals associated with it. We also talked an awful lot about the different things that we can do, which includes reducing consumption, improving waste management, and cleaning up. Basically, in terms of what we were doing for the home waste audit, we were mostly focusing on the first two. We were not focusing on the cleanup. And with the first two, in terms of thinking about what you would purchase at home, so maybe reducing your consumption by reducing what you put in all of your bins, or improving your waste management in terms of better understanding it and putting less in the landfill and more in the recycle bin to help stimulate and motivate that circular economy. So as a first step in survey 2, we asked you to learn a little bit more about the management of the waste where you lived. And we did this for 2 reasons. One was to increase your waste literacy to help improve that waste management bucket. Some of you might have already known things. I think here in Ontario, all of us are a little confused because we've had some changes, which we'll talk about tonight. We also wanted to be able to show the combined diversity of our waste streams, meaning we want to show you basically survey results across the different locations to show you how it can differ from location to location. And so we think that having a harmonized waste stream can actually help improve what can be recycled, how much can be recycled, and just people's understanding of waste literacy. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before I do, I just want to ask a question and ask you to type your answer in the chat, just something to think about, or maybe sharing from your own experience. How do you think that knowing more about what goes in your different bins or knowing more about your local waste management might help to reduce plastic pollution and simply reduce the waste that goes to landfill? So how does that waste literacy help, or why does that waste literacy help? Give you a moment to type in the chat. I don't see anything yet, but I might be asking kind of a big question with a lot of answers. So basically, here we go. Hoping that people will think before they wish cycle. Yeah, so I think that if we have a better understanding of our waste literacy, we're less likely to put things in the recycle bin that don't belong there, which provides a less contaminated waste stream, which should allow things we put in the recycle to be more likely to actually be recycled. Great answer. Lisa says, knowing how much plastic food wrap that was in our garbage is making me reconsider using it and replacing it with something compostable. Yeah, that's what I love about the home waste audit is you get to see personally, like you have waste literacy of your own waste, and you can think about ways in which you can reduce. So all of us participated, Susan and I, and Haley. I'm not sure if Haley's done the waste audit before, so we might have to get her to do it. But we participated the first year we did it, and I know that I still stick to some of the changes I made. So awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so let's start to look at some of our locations. And Kareem, I completely agree. Knowledge is power, which is why we do the waste audit. So for the waste audit this year, we had more than 2 locations, but I'm just going to focus on Ontario instead of all the different, like most people were in Toronto, but we did have people outside Toronto. But because we have a harmonized waste stream right now across Ontario, we have Ontario as one location, and our second location is Discovery Bay in Hong Kong. In other years, we've had people across Canada, some states within the United States, and we show the difference in between the materials that we ask about in the survey. Where does that go? So I'm going to show you today the difference between Hong Kong and Ontario. And my hypothesis is that they're pretty different given how far away they are from each other. So first, I'm just showing you the number of participants that have pickup for landfill, recycling, and organic waste. And this is among our participants. And the one thing I want you to notice is that the x-axis starts at 14. There are 16 participants that gave us our data. So there's actually pretty low variability. Everybody has access to recycling, curbside. Everybody has access to landfill waste, curbside. And all but one actually had access to organic waste, curbside, which is really awesome. The person who didn't have access to organic waste here is actually somebody from Toronto. So that could be due to living in, for example, a high rise or an apartment building, a condo building that might not have all of the same access to waste as, say, for example, the residences. And so Toronto does differ in that way. People in Toronto also noted having additional options available to them. So e-waste collection, curbside collection of furniture and yard waste. And others noted like the clothing bin donations that they might have in the neighborhood or for battery, which is really awesome. So overall, we're really lucky, all of us who did this survey. We don't have to go very far in order to recycle, including some of those hard to recycle items. But I just want to note this is not the case all over the world. In fact, in some countries, waste management is only like 6%, meaning only 6% of the waste that is produced is managed in like an engineered landfill or a recycling facility. So we're incredibly lucky that we don't have to pay a fee. We don't have to drive to go put it into a landfill, and we have those options. So I always try to remember that, especially when I go to other places and see how different sometimes it can be. So the second question we asked is, how does your city provide guidance on how to sort recycling waste? So this can vary by product type, like plastic bag, milk carton, etc. but it can also vary by plastic type. So those chasing arrow recycling symbols or the plastic material. So for example, PET or PET, the bottles, water bottles are number one. So here you can see that for most people, it's by product type, which is the way that it is here in Ontario. For some people, they noted that it was by material type, that's 6% of people. I believe that was in Hong Kong in Discovery Bay. And then we have some people that say there's a mixture of guidance provided or it is unclear. And this question was as we were learning about our waste management. So that's one thing to note. So for most residences in Ontario, it would be that product type. So then within the survey, we had asked about 5 common products and asked whether or not you can recycle it or not. And so here you can see I'm starting with Hong Kong because I want to spend a little extra time on Ontario because of our changes in rules. So here in Hong Kong, you can see that plastic bags are recyclable and that the other 4 items are not explicitly stated. But also remember that in Hong Kong, they have it by chasing arrow type. So this could be one of the reasons. And I do see something in the chat. So I'm just gonna, oh, Haley put in a link to waste sorting. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can. So then instead of going straight to these 5 items for Toronto, I actually want to start and show you what the Waste Wizard said in 2025. So this is basically the 5 items that we had included in our waste audit in previous years. And in previous years, we'd have people across Ontario. So for example, in 2025, we had people in Brampton, Hamilton, Peterborough, Scarborough, and Bowmanville. And Toronto and Scarborough are going to be the same, but Hamilton, for example, is a little bit different. So we really wanted to show people what was and wasn't recyclable. So for example, in Toronto, here you can see that black plastic was not recyclable, but in the region of Peel, it is. And so you would see these differences. Today, all 5 of these items can go in your recycle bin. So the city is, or the province is actually willing to take these and are saying that this is something that they now recycle. So I just want to take a moment to kind of explain the change that I think many of you noticed. So when the federal government listed plastic manufactured items as toxic under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, that they did that in order to open up these different policies, which included, for example, the single-use plastic ban, which a lot of people here are aware of. So for example, plastic straws are no longer available in restaurants and stores. But in addition to that single-use plastic ban, they did a couple other things. One was to put in new recycling standards to try to say that 50% of all plastics, and they have to define which ones by 2030 will be recycled. And they also said they were going to introduce extended producer responsibility across the country, province by province. So January 1st was the beginning of Ontario's provincial extended producer responsibility, and it is managed by Circular Materials. Circular Materials is basically an umbrella group of the producers. The producers being the people who make the plastic items that can be recycled. So not the people that make the resin pellets or mold it down, but for example, Loblaws, who creates like the No Name brand and their other brands, they are the largest producer in Ontario. So that means they pay the most money into producing circular materials. So they got together, they now run our recycling program. And so they have, in theory, been able to find extra markets for recycling. So once you're provincial wide, you can share recycling markets. And so now I assume this is why they're able to take more. But also they take some pretty hard to recycle items like chip bags. And so there's this question of like, how are they doing that? So I think we can be cautiously optimistic and hope that a lot of these items are truly recycled, which means we're harmonized across our province and more in theory can go to that circular economy. So now I will show you, basically, as I said, all of these things are now recyclable. So I'll show you the 2 items that we focused on this year because we wanted to have some items that were not recyclable, and I can talk a little bit about why. So the no frills bag here, for example, is one of those reusable, it's polypropylene, but it's like a cloth bag. Those cannot be recycled. Most people put them in landfill, but ideally you don't. Ideally they're reused and you remember to take them to the store. And then you don't have to get so many of them. But those are a reusable bag. The other one is compostable plastic. this is confusing to a lot of restaurants. As they've been told they can no longer use, for example, plastic straws, they want to shift to a plastic compostable straw. But in Ontario, we do not have enough of those industrial compostable facilities. So we don't actually have the infrastructure to really treat these things the way they should be treated as a compostable material. They're not recyclable, they're not compostable in our province. They go to the landfill. And so this is why the Canadian government has said, please do not replace plastics with this compostable material. Please replace it with something else. Like, for example, those like organic box materials that you get for takeout, which can actually go in your green bin as long as it doesn't have a plastic lining. So that's a lot of extra information. If anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat or ask us during the Q&A period, which is probably an even better idea. But if I see questions in the chat as Susan's talking, I will try to save those for later. Okay, now I'm going to pass it back over to Susan to share a deeper look into your survey results before we look at the waste results.
Amazing. So one of the findings that we see every year, which we love to see, is that the majority of participants learn something new through the process of completing this home waste audit. And then for those that didn't quote unquote learn anything new, we're still sure that there was some form of learning, but they're always these are the people who are already like just on top of everything when it comes to a home waste audit. Um, so the learning here is about the process of tracking your waste as well as those waste guidelines. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the responses. If you shared some of these, you might remember them if that was yours, but this is about some of the things that you learned. The big theme here that Chelsea has alluded to is these new recycling guidelines that we ourselves, Chelsea, myself, and Haley are also actively learning ourselves and kind of unlearning some of these things that we've been used to. Um, so some things that people noted were there's these newly recyclable items, for example, the black plastics we mentioned, but also aluminum foil, cling wrap, the non-compostable version of coffee cups, and even various cosmetic packaging, including deodorant tubes. And then there were some waste examples of waste items that if you didn't realize what the disposal method was. So, for example, in Toronto, diapers can actually go, well, we didn't do organic waste for the home waste audit. These actually can go in the organic waste in Toronto. But for wooden chopsticks and compostable plastics, the compostable plastics we just covered, those go into landfill. And so we'll have an opportunity to share in a little bit. But we'll just go on to the next slide. And actually, it's right now. Here's where the discussion is. I'd love for those of you here to share in the chat. Just curious what your easiest change that you made over these few weeks was. And I don't want to lead the types of answers, but it could be, from a change you made to how you find things to a change you made in a specific item and how you interact with it. Those very vague categories, but we'll give you a moment or two just to think back on that experience and the changes you made and what was the like, oh, I can't believe I wasn't doing this. That was so easy type of change. And our hope is that those who are reading these will be like, oh, maybe I'll give that a try. So I'm just going to keep an eye and see what people have been sharing. Yes, the recycling aluminum foil, that's a nice, easy change. And I actually was looking that one up. They recommend, if you're in Ontario, is to put it into a ball before you recycle it. Chelsea, one of her improvements is that she had the no junk mail sign, and it's really made a huge difference in terms of the mail they receive. Okay. And Jose is just sharing that some of the recycling has made some changes for some things that you've been doing incorrectly over the years. And it just takes a moment to stop and look at like, oh, I'm so used to doing it this way. Let me just double check that's correct. So thank you for sharing that. You can continue to think of these answers, but we're going to move on to number 2, which is what did you find challenging? And maybe you haven't made that change yet. Maybe you're wanting to find a way to make that change. And maybe someone here tonight will have some potential suggestions. Okay, how to limit snack wrappers given you love snacks. Yeah, that's a challenging one when you're attached to a certain product. So what is it about that comes in a material that is single use? Mhm. This is an interesting one shared, so involving the family. So that can be with kind of any new behavior you want to incorporate is you incorporate it, but having others to join as well. So thanks for sharing that one. Um, And just clarifying the things you can recycle, that might have been for number one, the easiest change of learning, or maybe it was more difficult to figure out all the different things you could recycle. I'm not quite sure, but yes, this is a good list of in the chat here, things that you can recycle. Okay. So let's move on to the last question that we have. And of course, I encourage you to continue to share is what were some tips that you found helpful? And did you have any tips of your own that you want to share now that you found? One that I'll share verbally is Chelsea shared the example of the reusable bag isn't recyclable. And I often see like food banks and other organizations who are actively looking for these bags because they then use them to package up things to donate to others. So depending on where you live, you can keep an eye out for calls like that if you've come into a scenario where now you have too many and you're not using all of them. Often there's groups looking to actively use them as well. Oh yeah, this is a good one here being shared. Composting napkins instead of putting it in the landfill. Yeah, um, that's right. All of these like tissues and napkins are an organic versus something that goes in the bin. Mhm. Steve is sharing that looking for other, yeah, these like we'll call them alternative recycling programs or reuse type organizations. So TerraCycle is another organization that accepts um, hard to recycle items. They have a cigarette butt project that we contribute our cigarette butt waste to. And then looking at some other more NGO type groups like Remarket, I know is one that hosts a lot of repair cafes and all sorts of great community focused events. One that I use a lot in my neighborhood is looking for these buy nothing groups that if you're looking to pass something on, there's often a neighbor who's looking for that thing. Um, and then overusable foodware is a great thing. So finding support from groups, some that we've worked with is Muse or Supply that have these reusable programs. Okay. Well, we'll move on now. I think there's lots of great tips. I'm just going to read the last one and then formally pass it over to Chelsea to dig into the data side of it. I just wanted to hear from Steve. Oh, that's amazing. So in Peterborough, the group that you organize, Clean Up Peterborough, you have collections for 13 items through TerraCycle. That's amazing. That's great. It takes that one like person to help galvanize everyone, and then it's quite straightforward to collect it. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into the data you sent us that were on those spreadsheets. So now looking into what you had in your waste bin. So actually, here's a fun one. Well, this will actually go to a little bit of the survey too. So this question is, how many items of trash or recycling and landfill does your household produce in a week? So this was a survey question. This is based on your hypothesis of how much waste you produce. And so here, I want you to notice that 54% of people thought it was 51 to 100 items, and 23% of people thought it was 0 to 50 items. So about 75% or more of people thought that it was less than 100 items. This is a pattern we see every single year. It is so hard to know how much you throw away until you actually see it, which is one reason why we love the home waste audit, ourselves included. I was like, whoa, I produce more than I thought. And it really made me rethink. So here you can see the actual waste audit data on the right. Now you can see that 47% plus 29% are over 100. So it's actually like a flip between what we thought and what we actually have. So here you can see that we do tend to produce a lot more waste than we think we do. And it's because of all of those, little wrappers and things that build up over time. And this is everything. So this is landfill and recycling. So now we've anonymized households. So you're all a letter. As we said, we got 16 different bits of data. So here you can see the total number of waste items during week 1 that are going into the black bin, which are the black bars, the landfill, and the blue bin for recycling, which are the blue bars. And so you can see that it really varied. In week 1, some people were putting more in recycling than landfill, and some people were the other way around, and some people was about equal. And you can also just see that the total amount of waste varies across households, as you would expect. So next, I'm going to start to show you basically the change between week 1 and week 2. I'm going to start by showing you by item, and then I'll get to the total. So first I'm going to start with landfill. So I'll show you the amount of certain items in week 1 and how that changed in week 2, and then show you some of the most common items in our landfill waste, but those will be during week 1. So here you can see it broken down by material so that you can see that for plastic in orange and for paper in gray, as well as for other. You can see that we had these reductions in certain materials going from week 1 to week 2, meaning a reduction in those materials in landfill. Mixed materials increased from week 1 to week 2. And so what some of this is basically figuring out what should go in different bins. So you might expect a reduction in plastic because maybe people are using less of it in week 2, but also maybe people are putting more of it into that recycle bin. So basically what you're looking at here is that within landfill waste, when you take the average count among households, the most common item thrown away was paper. And this averages at 23 items per week, but dropped to 20 items per week. So just an example of one of the types and how it decreased. Before I go to the next slide, I'm curious what people think might have been the most popular paper item in landfill waste during week 1. So based on your own experiences, would you think that they're like, oh, of course, it's blah of paper going into your landfill in week 1? Kleenex, yeah, spot on. So tissues was an incredibly common item. Receipts are second. So great job. And then there's scrap paper, packaging and wrappers, and cardboard boxes. So some of this material you would expect in week 2 to be going to organics bin and or going to your recycle bin. Similarly for plastic, what do you think are the most common plastic items that were going in landfill based on your experiences? Anyone want to write those in the chat? Take a guess. I actually can't remember what's on the next slide, but in the past, we've often had a lot of floss, which kind of surprised me when I did it. Steve says plastic wrap, also a good one. Soft plastic packaging, which would be plastic wrap. Hard plastic packaging is next. And here actually dental floss is pushed a little farther down in this one. Okay, so next I'm going to show you the recycling waste by material type. So here again, you can see in week 1 and in week 2. So the most common material type throughout the waste audit, as I had said, was paper, starting at an average of 27 items per week and decreasing to 25. But for plastic, it's an average of 20 items per week going into the recycling, and in week 2 going up to 24. So here you're seeing that plastic, which is now blue, going up. So like I said, some of that from the landfill is probably going down and going into the recycle bin. You can also see that you have paper going down from recycle. Maybe people are just using less. I'm not really sure. Or maybe it's tissues going in the organic bin. And then you can see metal also going up because, of course, that's a very recyclable material. So again, I'll show you the most common items in recycle bin. I'm going to start with paper, and then I'm going to go to plastic. So if anyone wants to add in the chat what they think would be common for paper or plastic in the recycle bin, go ahead and add. And I'll show you what the answer is. Starting with paper. And again, this is week 1. This is pre digging in. Newspaper and flyers. Yeah, good guess. Scrap paper, letters, and envelopes. So there it is. That is the most common thing, which is why I was pretty excited to make that change to reduce my amount of things that were coming into my mailbox. For plastic, the most common thing in the recycle bin is, again, soft plastic packaging, hard plastic packaging, and then drink bottles. So soft plastic packaging and hard plastic packaging are just incredibly common. I think now we've learned in Ontario that all of those things, if cleaned, remember you still have to clean it, can actually go in the recycle bin. But in the past, the soft stuff, if it wasn't stretchy, it didn't go there. So really our rules have changed dramatically. Okay, so now I'm going to show the overall results in terms of, did we actually see a decrease in the amount of waste that went to landfill? And did this include an increase in recycling, or did we decrease our waste overall? Either is fine, just something we look at every year. So here you can see overall results. The landfill waste is in black the recycling is in blue, and the total is in orange. And so you do see a total decrease overall, but it is not very much, which is totally fine, because what you do see is a decrease going into the landfill and an increase going into the recycling. And in fact, so during week 1, the average amount of landfill waste was 65 items per household. And by week 2, this decreased to 56 items in the landfill. So basically, we were decreasing our items by about 9 items on average. And while that might not sound like a lot, at the U of T trash team, our whole motto is every piece counts, meaning as an individual, we can all actually do a lot if we're all doing our part. So we have showed you basically what it means if we scale that up. So if just the 16 households that participated produce 9 items less per week in their landfill waste, just our 16 little households can reduce 7,500 items going to the landfill every single year. So imagine what that means if you basically scale that up across your neighborhood, across the city, across the province, across the country. We can make a really big difference by just having a better understanding of our waste, thinking about a little bit, and changing some of these behaviors. And I find, so our home waste audit, fun fact, used to be 4 weeks. We don't do that anymore because 4 weeks is a long time to ask people to audit their waste. And we found that we would get a lot of people kind of dropping out after 2 or 3 weeks. But the one thing that we find if you go longer, even though we don't ask people to take their data, is that those behaviors kind of stick and you start doing more over time. So Susan will say this, I know, but we do encourage you to keep thinking about this and keep up some of these patterns. So I'm going to pass it back over to Susan to finish us off and then have some question and answer.
Awesome. It's really nice to see the result of like the switch in diverting more away from our landfills. So thank you all for submitting all of the data. And as Chelsea's gone over, we've had quite a bit of information to digest, and that still only scratches the surface. So we do encourage you to continue on your own time and encourage others to do so. We actually have all of the materials, as you know, are on our website that people can do completely independent of us. I'm going to encourage you to do that. But I wanted to take us back to what we've learned about our experience. And the first one is that most of us learned something new. In fact, even though it didn't say that in the survey, I still think all of us learned something. There's something we can all take away. And we truly hope you can take that knowledge and share that onward. And we found that participants underestimated their weekly waste, and this is true for every year. So completely normal. And then we also recognize, as Chelsea so beautifully said, change takes time. But you're all off to a great start here. So as you just saw from the image on the previous slide, if we kept up that impact of reducing an average of 9 landfill items, just think of what that would look like at the end of a year, at the end of 2 years, at the end of 3 years, etc. So we have a nice gift for all of you on officially becoming home waste literacy experts. You'll get a thank you email with a link to this. But I believe it's also on our website. We have a certificate that you can add your information in and display it proudly, or put it on a website or wherever to proudly display your accomplishment. Because while we did decrease from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, it is still a significant thing to take part of. So we thank you for giving your time to this and learning from it as well. So just to wrap up, we encourage you to recognize that waste reduction doesn't need to end here. So as you are going through your day-to-day in waste sorting, we wanted to introduce something that we call our solutions hierarchy. And this helps us rank the actions we take to reduce waste, to keep it from ending up in the environment. So you can see recycling is there. It plays an important role, but we start at the top and then work our way down to combine these actions to better reduce what ends up in landfill. So there are a number of actions we can consider first. So we encourage you to kind of keep this in the back of your brain as you're going through your day-to-day. And to remind you that we also have our trash team tips that borrow that same mentality from our solutions hierarchy. And they're on our website. If you go back in the archives of our social media, you can find those posts and share those onwards. And actually front and center in the middle, that put a stop to junk email tip came from Chelsea's experience that she shared earlier, and it's one of our favorite ones to share. So we'll turn it over now for Q&A before we formally wrap up. There's been some good conversation in the chat, and I haven't read it yet, but I see Steve has this added. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment. I'll read that in a moment, but if you have questions, so we'll just alternate. If you do want to ask them out loud, just use the raise your hand feature from the reactions menu, and then we'll just say it's your turn and you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll just continue to read them out loud from the chat and answer accordingly. So I'll just keep an eye on things, and I'm just going to review Steve's comment unless Chelsea's already read it.
I'm reading it now.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the comment here is kind of getting into what the infrastructure is in terms of waste. And I don't have the answer to that as well, but this is certainly an area I think Chelsea kind of getting at what Chelsea mentioned with the chip bag is we want to kind of learn more now that they have the products, what happens.
Yeah. We've actually been trying to get a tour of our GFL facility here in Toronto so we can ask more of these questions.
Yeah.
We had a call with Circular Materials and said they would also get back to us on how they're recycling some of these items. They told us where they're sending them to, but I don't quite know what they're turning them into.
Okay. Are there any other questions, or even if it's a tip that you didn't share earlier that you want to share now? You can just add those to the chat. I don't see any hands raised unless I'm missing any, but that's also an option if you want to share out loud. I'll just give it another minute or two in case someone is actively typing a lengthy question, but we might just have a shorter Q&A tonight. No problem. We'll make sure we'll leave you with our contact information if you have any questions beyond today. But we do have a question. It is industry involved in reduction projects. So it's a great question. So what's the level of involvement that industry plays with waste reduction?
I think the answer to that one is it varies across industry and across what they're working on. So two positive examples is that we are working right now with a bunch of construction companies, including Ellis Don, who's the biggest in Canada, to come up with best management practices for the leakage of foam from insulation from the construction site. So we noticed a lot of foam in our trash traps, and we noticed it was not coming from foodware. We traced it back down to construction and worked with them to pilot some solutions on their site. And now they're actively working with us on a solution. Another one is Haley and I are in the process of working with the Chemical Industry Association of Canada on trying to regulate basically backstops for manufacturers to stop pellets from going down the drain. So sometimes industry is really willing to work with you on a solution. I think the harder, it depends on what the solution is and whether or not it will affect their bottom line. But for circular materials, for example, for our extended producer responsibility, it is industry paying now for our waste management. It is no longer coming out of our tax dollars, but that is mandated federally. And they have to basically set up a scheme where industries are incentivized by making more recyclable plastics and disincentivized for making less recyclable plastics. So for example, if I'm a producer and I make chips, I'm going to pay a lot more for that chip bag than I would if I'm a producer and all I make are really recyclable PET bottles, like of water, like if I sell bottled water, for example. So there is some of that as well, but that's industry being part of it. And I'm not saying they don't want to be, I don't know the answer, but that is federally mandated. And then I see a question, which might be follow up on this. Could you help me understand the circular materials new guidelines involving accepting snack wrappers? Yeah, so I think the thing with this, it's very weird because for the longest time, mixed materials have not been allowed to go in the recycling bin. So to see chip bags on there, for example, or like granola bars, we were all pretty floored. Now, I think if your chip bag or your granola bar wrapper is covered in chocolate or oil, it still has to go in the landfill because remember, you still have to clean your materials. And if it can't be cleaned off, like it's too sticky, then it needs to go in the landfill. My hypothesis for what happens when you can put them in there and it goes to a company is that they're probably getting recycled into something like pallets or some kind of reusable, durable material that it doesn't like. For example, we send cigarette butts to TerraCycle, and a lot of those times those are also turned into pallets that are used for shipping things around. But I don't know the answer. This is something I'd also really like to get to the bottom of. So once we find out, we can email everyone once we have more information.
And coincidentally, we do know that TerraCycle has a lot of different streams of things that they've been collecting, including snack wrappers and such. So I'd be
Mhm.
curious if it's a similar process to the cigarette butts, but we don't know. So
Yeah,
can't definitively say.
I bet it is.
Hmm.
Um, the next question is what is done with food waste and compost? So that's a different stream run by the city. So circular materials only runs blue bins that are street bins and residents, not even business actually. So they're not even taking care of 50% of the recycling in the city. But food waste and compost, those green bins, those go to a composting facility here in Toronto, basically. And so that is like a big vat of items, the way that I understand it. And the reason that you put it in a plastic bag and the reason you can put diapers in there is because it floats out and they take it off and put that in the landfill. But that compost, like if you go to what are they called, Susan? Environment
Oh,
days. You
community
go
environment days. Hmm.
community environment days. You can go pick up that compost and use it in your garden. So they actually share that compost with the city.
Yeah.
So that's a different facility.
The next is more of a comment, but yes, trying to wrap your head around. So going into the cleaning, some items are a little more trickier to clean, like toothpaste tubes. Um,
Yes.
Agreed. Challenging to clean, and I'm not sure the best method for that myself without using a lot of water.
Once we get that tour, we'll
Yeah.
let you
Yeah. Yeah.
know. Ah,
So
well, we
getting
have more federal regulations in the future to force people to think more about recycling. There's one more federal regulation that it was supposed to turn on in 2030. So basically, that one is that 50% of all plastic materials have to be made out of, or 50% of the materials have to be recycled content. So whatever they decide to like define as those plastic materials under this regulation have to be made out of 50% post-consumer recycled content. And the reason they want to do this is to improve the markets for recycling. So recycling is possible. One of the reasons why recycling rates are so low is because recycled content is more expensive than virgin plastic. So because we incentivize fossil fuels, we are basically incentivizing raw virgin material plastic. And so it is cheaper to buy a virgin plastic than a recycled content. If you're a business trying to make a living, you're probably going to choose the cheaper option. And so therefore you have less people choosing recycled content. But if you regulate this, like you must make it that way, it will drive down the cost. So we'll see when this turns on. There was a lawsuit. So when the federal government listed plastic as toxic under SEPA, the industry sued the federal government. Federal government lost. They appealed, which put a stay on all the policy, and it went to the next level of court just under the Supreme Court. Federal government won. And so all the policies are still in place. And so in theory, these things should continue to roll out. So you should see that one soon. It is possible industry will appeal again and it will go to the Supreme Court, but there has not been any mention of that just yet. Which leads into our next question. Is there any truth to the stat that only 9% of what we put in recycling? It's the stat's a little different. So there is truth to the stat that 9% of our recyclable material, no, sorry, that 9% of our waste is recycled. So that includes materials that cannot be recycled. It includes materials that can be recycled but don't go in the recycle bin. But it also includes what I think you're getting at is if you have a bin that's really contaminated, some of your recycling might not get recycled. Also, of course, you hear horror stories of like, I watched the guy with the truck and the blue bin went in with the landfill. So there are some things we don't understand. But that 9% is 9% of our waste. The next question. What bylaws or incentives do we have to increase individuals' recycling rates or at least sorting? I heard food scraps and landfills responsible for a lot of methane production. Yeah. Good question. I'm not sure if there are incentives to increase our sorting. Am I right, Susan? I can't think of one.
Yeah.
I know
I'm trying
they
to think
put
of.
it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't have an answer, so continue.
Yeah. So it works really well when you have a container deposit scheme. So for example, in some places you can return for example, in Ontario, we can often take not our plastic or our like soda cans, but you can take your beer cans or your beer bottles to the beer store and get money back.
Yeah.
Those type of schemes work really well for plastic, and they exist in lots of places in the world. And when they do, you never see like a pet bottle on the ground. But here we don't have that for plastic. And the reason is because nobody wants to manage it. And it's one of the most valuable things in the blue bin. So I don't think we have anything that incentivizes us, for example. They just tried to make it easier on us by, I don't know if you remember, the blue bin used to be sorted and now everything goes in there together. And that was to try to get us to be better about putting everything in so that it could be sorted at the materials recovery facility. Um,
Yeah, it's a good note. If anything, currently it feels more like processes versus like a specific incentive or regulation.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree, Lisa. We do need to have more green bins in more places. Like at U of T, we don't, for example.
Mhm.
So after lunch, when I have food waste, I have to either bring it home or it would go to landfill. So businesses and schools are a bit different than like your bins and residences. And same, like Susan, you live in a high rise. Do you have green bin? You do, right?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, all the newer builds, it's a default, but the older buildings don't.
Don't. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is a fun discussion. Any other questions?
Yeah. It feels like that's good discussion. And again, so we'll move on to the wrap up slide. Um, but you're still welcome to add questions. We'll put the last slide up there, but I will just read this second half of what Lisa just shared. Um, Oh, amazing. So after you did your home waste audit, you did a cleanup around in the area of where you live. And that got little bit of attention of people curious of like, what are you doing? And then you already inspired someone else to take that on. So that's such a beautiful thing. And it really is a great, real example of it just takes that one action and then it starts to build with others joining in. So thanks for doing that. And now the weather, well, I don't know what the weather will be like for the rest of this week, but there will be more consistent nice weather, which is a really great time to get out there and clean, especially with the snow melt. There's probably quite a bit out there. So we'll just formally wrap up and thank you so much all for coming. And I mentioned before, if you want to get in touch with us, if you just send an email to our general email, we'll make sure it gets to the right person. And if you want to stay up in touch with us, you can follow our social media. We have a monthly newsletter that lets you know about upcoming events. We'll have a cleanup for small plastics coming up on May 9th. And so when that event is ready, it'll be shared in our newsletter as well. But with that, we'll thank everyone and say goodnight. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for participating.